You're listening to the Snowdeal and the Priest podcast. I'm Danny Priest here with Ian Snowdeal, and we are joined by Ari Temkin. You have a host of titles, so I'll just name a couple different ones. Part of the Dallas Cowboys Radio Network, 105.3 The Fan, host of Sirius XM Big 12 Radio Channel, co-host of the Showtime with Coop podcasts on CLNS Media Network. Ari, how are you? And thank you for joining us here today.
Doing great. Appreciate you having me. Daniel, obviously I know you pretty well because of the work we were doing together with CLNS Media. So I appreciate you, buddy. And you guys both have some tremendous last names. We got to work on the title of your podcast because you both have some really good possible puns for your names. Priest and Snowdeal, there's a lot we could do with that. So we got to rethink it here. I'm not as creative or clever as other people, but there's something we can do better than Snowdeal and Priest. There's some pun possibilities there.
Truth be told, that was an emergency name because
clearly
it used to be called Fresh Meat, which one of our professors gave us that title as like a joke, but we just rolled with it and we put out a few episodes, got some decent views on them, and all of a sudden this company in Chicago emailed us and said we were using their name and that we had to give it up. So
you got a cease and desist from Fresh Meat.
Yeah, we've been rolling with this ever since.
That was a radio show.
You're like, we're just college kids. What?
We're not making any money. Please just let us keep the name.
Yeah, right.
So we can work on it, though. There'll be something there.
I'm just saying you both have very punnable. You're not like Smith and Johnson, I mean, Snowdeal and Priest are pretty kind of, unique names that we could do good puns with. So that's all I'm saying.
Can you just start by kind of telling the people listening, what a regular day is for you? Not that anything is regular right now, but kind of what you do and how you go about your day to day with your work.
Sure. I'm fortunate because, I started in, more traditional media, radio, and, I worked in small towns, and then, I was able to work my way up into Austin, Texas, where I hosted a talk show on 104.9 The Horn, and then into San Antonio, where I was with ESPN Radio in San Antonio for about 6.5 years. So that was more traditional, get ready for your radio show, prep for a 3-hour radio show kind of thing, where that's really all you do. And it's a dream in many ways because it's just constantly reading and watching and observing sports and finding interesting storylines and interesting narratives and interesting talking points. And so that was, really my day to day for a long time. And then, I was part of a digital media startup and kind of at the tail end of my stay in San Antonio. And that in many ways changed a lot of what I did day to day. And it changed the way I looked at the business, and the business is evolving. It's changing. I think there's sort of this mix between traditional media and new media, and, and those are blending. So I think no matter what you do, you can continue to do what you do and stay in your comfort zone, or you can become comfortable being uncomfortable and learn new things and figure out where the business is going and evolving. And it doesn't matter what business you're in. You always have to evolve. I mean, there are legitimate issues for businesses during this pandemic, but at the same time, you have to evolve or die. And a pandemic, it's not just this is not just something that's going to be gone here and gone. It's like you have to evolve no matter what business you're in to figure out how to leverage where the business is going, no matter what the business is. And so, I was with the digital startup for a long time, digital media startup for a long time. And then I moved to Dallas and was working in that capacity. And then that startup kind of changed, evolved, and was less focused on content. And so I kind of went away from that and was more into Sirius XM and hosting a daily talk show on the Big 12 network and the Cowboys radio network. And then I got an opportunity with CLNS Media to do some recruiting, podcasting, and a bunch of different stuff. And so it's a long way to say I really enjoy my jobs because I'm not doing the same thing every day. Every day there's new things to learn, to figure out, to investigate. And I found a lot of fulfillment in that. I love hosting talk shows and, the same kind of stuff that I talked about at the beginning, with finding interesting narratives and talking points and exposing those. And I still enjoy that very much, but I also enjoy not doing the same thing every day and changing up what I do. And, and that keeps it fresh. And I'm just a firm believer in know the things you don't know so that you can grow as a person, evolve as a person, and get better as a person, get outside your comfort zone.
Mm-hmm. Well said.
I hope that answered your question. I don't know if it did.
Yeah.
What do I do? A lot of different things.
A lot of different things. And then just like going into like your past, like how did you honestly just get into sports media in general, and then focusing right now into like your radio end of things?
Sure. So, I mean, I always wanted to be in sports, and that's kind of what everybody says. I've had so many talks with people that it's like, my son just loves sports. He's obsessed with sports. He knows every stat. It's like, yeah, I know. I mean, like, so does a lot of boys, a lot of kids, a lot of girls too. I mean, it's just like, yeah, there are a lot of sports is such a galvanizing thing in the world. And there's such a love for sports insofar as like, it's probably not safe for there to be sports on right now, but we kind of need it, So that gives you an idea of how important sports is in our society. So I always wanted to be close to sports. I hosted a weekly 1 hour day talk show in my final year at the University of Kansas. And that was my first opportunity there, real opportunity in sports talk radio. And then, I kind of didn't know what I wanted to do and got some really good advice. And that's, the best advice I can give anybody else is find people that will give you advice. Some people will give you good advice, some people will give you bad advice, and some people won't give you any advice. But just find a lot of people that will give you advice. Find people in your industry you want to work in, reach out, email them, ask them for advice. You'll get some good advice. And the advice that I got, when I grew up in Chicago, and so I moved back to Chicago briefly after graduating, and knew I wanted to do it, but didn't know, should I stay in a big market, maybe try to work as a board op at a station part-time, kind of back my way in that way. Should I work in sales or in marketing at a radio station and work my way that way? And I spoke to a guy who worked in radio sales at a sports station in Chicago. And he was like, what do you want to do? And I was like, well, I want to be on air. He said, well, go be on air, like go somewhere where they'll put you on air. Because if you want to work in sales to get your way on air, it's not going to happen. So go be somewhere that you're going to be on air. And I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. So, I got an opportunity at a station in Moberly, Missouri, which, is a town of about 30,000 people. But it was a pretty big station that kind of covered all of mid-Missouri. So it was a big station for a bunch of small towns in Missouri. And I did everything. I did farm news. I did, country music DJ. I was, I did everything. I didn't do any sports talk, but I did a lot of play-by-play for sports. And, I worked tremendously long hours and got paid very little. And the opportunity, in hindsight, it was tough. I mean, it was a tiny town. I grew up in Chicago. I thought Lawrence, Kansas would be the smallest town I'd ever live in. And, here's this tiny town that was so foreign to me, and I got the experience of being on air every day, which is just, you can't replace that. It was just so impactful for me in hindsight, especially. And so I spent 2.5 years there. I was sending out MP3s and I was just constantly trying to reach out to people and stay in touch. But it's difficult. It's difficult when you're a small town to get out of that small town. So I kind of took a leap of faith and moved with my girlfriend at the time, wife now, to Austin, Texas. I didn't know what I was going to do. I wanted to stay in radio, but didn't really have many prospects there other than trying to get in touch with some of the program directors, the stations in Austin, and not really hearing back from them. So long story short, I kind of worked my way into an opportunity at the Austin sports station, but that happened because of the experience that I had being on air every day. I was comfortable being on air, and I had that comfort level that once I got, it's kind of like in sports, like Tom Brady, I'm not comparing myself to Tom Brady. What I'm saying is Brady was the backup. He put himself in position to where when he got the opportunity, he would take that. And that's in life, that's what you have to do. You have to seize those opportunities. There's luck involved. You have to get that luck, that break. But if you are positioned to be successful because you've put in the work, you'll thrive when you get that break. That's what you have to do. You want to put in the work that once you get an opportunity, you can take advantage of it, just like Tom Brady and many other athletes across sports. And that's what happened with me. I seized the opportunity when I had it, and that opportunity came from the work that I put in Missouri. So I worked in Austin for a couple of years, and then got an opportunity in San Antonio for a station that was this owned by the same company at the time. Was in San Antonio as the program director and show host for about six years, and then took another leap of faith in my career when got the opportunity to do the Cowboys stuff. But that wasn't a full-time job; it was just part-time. So I knew with what I was doing with that digital startup was an opportunity, plus the Cowboy stuff. And my wife is from Dallas, so it was a good opportunity for us to move back, where she lives, where her parents can help us take care of the kids. So it all made sense. And then, a few months after that, I got the opportunity with SiriusXM, and then an opportunity with CLNS Media. So, the thing is, if you're in my position, I'm never satisfied. I'm always wanting more. And so, you kind of feel like if I'm in your position, graduating college, like if I looked at myself now, I'd be like, wow, that's amazing. I'm so lucky to be there and happy to be there. Like, that's great. I'm fine being where I am. And then when you get there, you're not, it's never enough. You always want more. So I think that's good, I guess. Sometimes you need to smell the roses, but other times it's good to, to constantly looking for the next thing and better opportunities and bigger opportunities.
Yeah, for sure. And you have some years built up in the industry now. Do you think, working with athletes and kind of trying to cover them, has that gotten more difficult as
Yes.
Big emphasis has come across athletes trying to control their own message versus letting the media take a hold of their message? Do you think it's a little more difficult to talk with them and get stories out of them now than it was years ago?
Access is harder. Access is much more limited. You look back on the media, 20, 30 years ago, and there was just an unbelievable amount of access that they got. But I think it makes sense. There's so much media, not even to take into account social media, that you have to. Before 20, 30 years ago, there was newspaper, television guys, radio guys. That's it, right? So the point of entry for media is much easier now than it used to be, which is good. It's a good thing. It makes it a true meritocracy in that regard. But at the same time, yeah, your coverage is going to be limited, or your access is going to be limited. So I think in that, and this has always remained true, it's a relationship-based thing. You have to put in time and an effort and build trust. The best reporters do that. Especially in terms of breaking stories. I'm not out to break stories. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm more into the talk show, interesting narratives, that kind of point of view. So I don't need to have great relationships with players in order to do that. But yeah, it's access is definitely more limited. And to your point, there's the Players Tribune. Obviously, players have control of their brand through their social media accounts. So I wouldn't say they don't need the media as a conduit, because I think that's short-sighted. But yeah, I think there's a belief from athletes that they have their own voice and their own platforms in order to be able to tell their own stories. And so, yeah, that also limits access too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then that's just tough. They always want to cultivate their own message, but in your sense, it's a lot easier. But then going into your favorite, so you've been covering a lot. What's your favorite kind of sports memory in your career so far?
I've been pretty fortunate. First of all, I grew up in Chicago as a Bears fan, but the Dallas Cowboys are God's gift to sports talk radio. In Austin, the Cowboys are huge. In San Antonio, in San Antonio, the Cowboys are bigger than the Spurs are, to give you an idea. They're just so huge. So I've covered them for a long time, even before I lived in Dallas, and they're just so great. They are really just so polarizing and always feeding headlines, and there's so much interest in them. They're the highest valuation of any franchise in all of sports. Being as close as I have to the Cowboys now in Dallas has been fun. But certainly being able to cover the Spurs when I was able to, I was really fortunate to be in San Antonio at a great time. I moved to San Antonio the year the Spurs drafted Kawhi Leonard. I saw Kawhi go from basically being a inconsistent 3-point shooter, great defensive player, to becoming one of the best players in the NBA. I was in Miami when Ray Allen hit the shot to beat the Spurs, or to send the game 6 in overtime, and then the Spurs lose in game 7, and then was covering the Spurs and Heat the next year when the Spurs won the title. So those 2 years, covering Spurs and Heat, certainly are experiences I'll never forget, especially obviously, being in the building when Ray Allen hit the shot, and those memories. Those are just kind of the things in sports that, you think about how lucky you are to be in this business, to be covering that. So yeah, that certainly covering the Spurs in that period of time was tremendous. It was a renaissance for an organization. The Patriots get so much credit for the longitudinal success they've had. The Spurs are right there with them, rebuilding, drafting and developing players, winning over multiple decades. It's incredible what the Spurs have been able to do, and being that iteration of the Spurs run was a lot of fun, and something certainly I'll always remember.
After Ray Allen hit that shot, did you think the Spurs still had a chance in that series? Or did that feel like kind of the knockout punch them? Because those series, I feel like people forget those two teams were so close with each other every time they played.
It's a great question. I mean, I'd be lying to you if I said I thought it was over. However, I went to the University of Kansas, as I mentioned, and in 2008, Mario Chalmers hit a shot against Memphis to send that game in overtime. And just in my experiences in watching basketball, teams that hit shots like that don't usually lose, especially in that game. In Game 6, I had a pretty good feeling the Spurs weren't going to win in Game 6 after that shot went in, for the same reason that, like, the Jayhawks weren't going to lose when Mario Chalmers hit that shot to send the national championship game in 2008 to overtime. And you see that all the time in basketball. It's just a back-breaking shot that players will say it didn't affect them, but it does. It does. Mm-hmm. Now, they still had a chance in Game 7, and so I'd be lying to you if I said, I didn't think were going to win Game 7. And not only that, but, like, Game 7 was really close, too. Like, Tim Duncan had a point-blank layup to win the game at the end and didn't. So, I certainly felt good about their chances in Game 7. But the thing is, like, the Spurs only get one of those titles. Like, I think some Spurs fans would look back on that and be like, oh man, they could have had that two-peat going back to back. But it's like losing in, I can't remember what year it was, losing to the Heat set them up to win the next year. And their whole year was set up as, to rectify it. That whole season from the start was set up to right the wrong, to win that title. So they only get one of those two. So they still end up getting a title. And that's the thing I think that, like, stands out to me is they weren't going to win both of them. If they won the one when Ray Allen hit the shot, they probably don't go back to back. Now we'll never know, but that whole season the next year, I think was 2016.
Around
the years. Yeah. That whole season, and you could really do a great study in sports on what Greg Popovich did for that season, because a lot of the things that he did as a coach you just don't see in sports. It's a lot of things you don't often see in sports. Pop, I think, is the greatest NBA coach ever, and maybe the greatest coach in team sports ever. And I'm saying this to people that grew up around the Celtics, and I'm sure you guys know, even though you're young, about Red Auerbach. And then also, I grew up in Chicago in the 90s with Phil Jackson, and great coaches. They've won more titles than Pop, but I just think the ability to evolve, like, those coaches didn't evolve as much as Pop did over the course of the 5 championships that he won.
Yeah, and he's still doing it to this day too. So
true, but they're kind of a mess.
Yeah, they need some more pieces. But you mentioned you grew up in Chicago. I don't know, like, how old you were around the time Jordan was everything around there. You said you were a Bears fan. Do you feel like growing up in that city kind of influenced your passion for sports?
No question.
Or you would have had it?
Yeah, no question. I mean, and definitely the Bulls in the 90s. And I was born in 1985. So yeah, I was right there in the window of my childhood. Is the Bulls were the best always, every year. I didn't know any different. And so, yeah, no question, Jordan and the Bulls, that influenced my life tremendously in terms of my passion for sports.
Yeah. Ian, you want to go into some of the college football stuff now?
Yeah, so you do a lot of work just covering college football, and then, like, how much is, like, this pandemic going to affect this moving forward, and, like, honestly, just your daily operations as well, just like you working as, like, an entity?
Sure, a ton. It's going to be very difficult for there to be a college football season in 2020. Very difficult. It much more difficult than the professional levels. So, they are going to try to jam a college football season because they have to, because they have budgets to meet. But But at the same time, it's going to be difficult. How has it affected my job? Pretty big. I went from hosting a daily talk show on Big 12 Radio to a daily live talk show to hosting a pre-recorded podcast, pre-recorded show for an hour every day, basically starting in March. And then, in July, we went to 3 days a week. So it's been tough, especially when you're paid per show. It's had a dramatic influence on my my income. But I've just got to figure out other things to do to make money. But that's not exactly related to the lack of college football as much as it is related to all the producers and engineers and such that would have to go into studios and offices in Washington, D.C. to make these shows happen. So now I'd be lying if I said it wasn't somewhat related to college football. And if there isn't, a college football season, that would certainly impact, I would imagine, the strategy we have at SiriusXM on that. But just got to go with the flow and evolve, kind of like I said at the start.
Mm-hmm. And there's a ton of issues with college sports and, trying to make a season happen, especially football. Do you feel like there's one primary issue that's kind of holding it back? I know a lot of people say it's tough for college to operate because there's not like one figure guiding things. Like the NBA has Adam Silver, the NFL has Roger Goodell. College doesn't have that. Do you feel like that's a big factor, or it's just the entire list of, what teams are playing, what kind of schedule can they do, all that other stuff?
Yes. There's so many things. If only there was like a organization that could oversee all of college sports and, and influence decision-making and make decisions like a commissioner. If only there was some kind of an organization that was set up to do that. It's bizarre how that doesn't already exist, or they don't really have the power to really tell college football anything. It's amazing. The NCAA has outsourced their greatest commodity, the college football playoff, formerly to the BCS and now to the college football playoff. The NCAA doesn't run their most important commodity, which is college football playoffs and the national championship, which is incredible. Shows you how much power they have.
Yeah.
So that's the problem is, Mark Emmert and the NCAA could fulfill this role, but they can't because the power resides in the money, and the money resides in the Power Five. So, yeah, it's very difficult because there's a lack of uniformity because everybody's going to do what's in their own best self-interest. I'm talking about the Power Five, which we saw with how it all rolled out with each conference sort of making their own decisions. Now there's rumors the Big Ten is thinking about potentially canceling the season already, which is incredible, which would, I would say this early would be unthinkable, especially with regards to the type of revenue that they would stand to lose. But yeah, there's just so many pieces here to indicate how hard it's going to be to have a football season. It's testing, it's protocol, it's procedures, it's coaches, not doing selfish things to win football games. We've already seen a lot of players come out and say that they don't feel safe playing under these guidelines. And then you have, of course, just the players having the feeling of invincibility, even if I get this, it won't affect me, whatever they're thinking, they'll justify going out, having fun, being, doing what college kids want to do, which is just, it's tough. So yeah, there's just so much there in terms of everything we just laid out and more. So it's difficult, but again, they're going to try to push a season no matter what, because of the type of revenue that's at stake.
Mm-hmm. And same topic, but flipping it over to the NFL, you're in Jerry world. I'm assuming he is, I'm under the impression that he's going to want to play the season no matter what. I'm sure a lot of other owners feel the same way. I think the NFL is going to try. I don't know if they'll be able to finish it. Do you feel the same way, that they're going to try no matter what to get the season going?
So the NFL, professional sports are different. They're collectively bargained. So you can't, that's part of the issue with college sports, where you have like college kids saying, I don't feel like we're getting the best medical care. The coaches aren't looking out for our best self-interest. And then there's the feeling of exploitation because they're not, they're not making money, right? So there's all that at the college level. The NFL level, it's in professional level, it's different, right? There's collective bargaining agreements that both sides have agreed to, so you kind of understand the rules of engagement better. You can also sort of force quarantine in a way that you probably can't at the college level. Like, there's just so many different components, professional versus amateur, that are there. But I mean, the NFL doesn't think like, is there a pandemic going on? Is there something we should be concerned about? Like, the NFL seems so far moved from reality, it's even hard to express it, which I guess could be a good thing, right? The NFL will have a season. They might have replacement players. I don't know what they're going to have a season. I'm telling you, they're like, they even bypassed the whole we're going to have fans. Like, they just went straight to the fans will wear masks. Like, there wasn't even an announcement of NFL is going to have fans in games this year. They just went for like, our fans are going to wear masks. It's like, whoa, like that is how out of tune with reality the NFL is. They didn't even make an announcement that they were going to have fans in the stadium. They went straight for our fans wear masks, which, I mean, you go to an NFL game, you walk inside, you take off your mask, you start drinking beer, you start eating. You're not putting your mask back on. Like, I wouldn't feel comfortable going to an NFL stadium.
Yeah.
Today. So yeah, the NFL will play, and they'll play, and they'll play a season. They will not cancel the season. I just see no way that happens. I just see no way that happens.
Yeah, I think it's
as crazy as that sounds, but the NFL is even crazier. Like, they're going to get their season.
Yeah, the way they've handled it has just been crazy too. Like, really, the only team that's had a series of opt-outs has been the Patriots. It was like 5 or 6 guys in one day last week who all decided that they weren't going to play. And then other than that, I feel like you haven't seen a lot around the league. So
no,
it's
totally.
just the entire league's mentality that, like, this isn't even really going on and we're just going to carry on.
I think there will be more as we get closer to the season. There will be more. But, yeah, the Patriots are the most impacted by it. And if, Bill Belichick's an extremely competitive guy. He doesn't want to lose. But you almost kind of feel like, throw Jarrett Stidham out there, tank the season, and go get Trevor Lawrence and, go win another 6 Super Bowls.
You'd like that, Ian.
Got to be brutal. But, I mean, that's what you have right now. You've got very important, impactful players that are saying they're not going to play this year. And I don't know, Devin McCourty hasn't made a decision yet, but it certainly seems like he's thinking about not playing.
Gone. His brother's probably gone. That's 2 more out of there.
Right. So, I mean, at this point, go get Trevor Lawrence. Go piss off everybody in the NFL.
All right, back to like the media side though. You're host a podcast, but then you're also doing live radio all the time. Is there like a big difference in the way that works for you, or is it kind of the same?
No, totally different. And that's, like I'm hosting tons of podcasts, and now even with SiriusXM, I'm not, hosting live radio. I do a lot of fill-in work for ESPNU radio. And I've done some live shows recently there, but there's just nothing like live radio. So that's to say that I much prefer live radio over podcast. Now, that's kind of an incomplete statement because I much prefer hosting a live radio show to making that live radio show a podcast, a pre-recorded podcast. The podcasts that I host independent of that are unique and fun and interesting in their own ways. But yeah, I mean, there's just nothing like a live radio show, especially in this day and age where news is constantly happening and, being able to react to it in real time as opposed to, a pre-recorded show that's kind of recorded to be live. And it's like you record it and then it's done. And then something happens in the news cycle and it's like, well, now we got to re-record. As opposed to you're doing a live radio show, you're going to miss, after off the air, news might break, but that's okay. We'll get to it tomorrow. And, you have the excuse of, well, I mean, we were off the air at that point. The show was over at that point. Whereas opposed to now where it's like, if you're not, like the other night, 8:30 Central, 9:30 Eastern time, the Big 12 made the announcement of they're going to do the 9 conference games plus 1. Well, show's already recorded by then. So the next day, the biggest story in the Big 12 is not going to be on your show. Yeah. And that's not completely accurate because there were indications that would be the case, but it's just not the same. There's just a lot of free flowing conversation. It's just different, and I miss it a lot.
Mhm. You think once sports kind of get back to what we were used to before, you're going to be able to jump back into that stuff, no problem?
Yeah, absolutely.
I feel like that's something that'll never go away. Just kind of the style of radio and, like you said, free flowing conversations. Like that's something that'll always be kind of relevant and able to do, at least in my opinion, I think.
Oh, totally. The spoken word will live forever. It's unique. It's different. It's even if it exists on like YouTube. I have a YouTube page, and I mean it's basically radio, but visual. So it's the same thing. So even when there's self-driving cars, so people will be less reliant on listening and can watch, there will still be some semblance of spoken word. Opinions, free thought, free flowing, like that stuff will never. And that's why podcasting has become even bigger. It's just a behemoth because of that. So yeah, it's there will always be a need for theater of the mind, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Now, last thing before we let you go, we can't let you go without running you through some predictions for the sports that we have back. So I don't know how much bubble basketball you've been watching, but the game's been really good. I think there's something to be said about removing the worst 8 teams from the league, that the level of play goes up significantly because every game has been close and competitive.
Agreed.
So who do you think is going to win the finals?
Yeah, I'm curious to see if like this spawns changes to leagues, because it's such a unique circumstance. There's so many different things. You're trying out different things that you've never tried out. So do you, with 20 games left in the NBA season in the future, do you like not basically say that, hey, teams that are out of it, and let the rest of the teams play? And if you have,
I would love that. If you
it'd
just
be amazing.
like
And if you had a game
All-Star
scheduled
break,
against a team
the
that's out,
worst
that's been
teams,
kicked out,
kick them out, let
Yeah.
them go. And if they're mad about it, just be better. Don't be one of the worst 8
right?
teams.
Just
when it
be
comes to
better.
competitive.
Just don't be so bad. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, try it.
It's also gonna be crazy that like the finals are gonna be going on in October, competing head to head with the NFL. Now the NFL is the king. It's the top 10 rated television shows in 2019 are 9 of them are NFL games, and the 10th is, This Is Us. So I mean, like it's not even close. But it's gonna be interesting to see, with them going head to head with the finals in October. Like that's gonna be cool, especially with the circumstances, and especially if the NFL is like having replacement players. It's gonna be very interesting. But I mean, the Lakers, it's hard to think that anybody's going to be the Lakers. The Eastern Conference should be ashamed of itself. Like it has been so long, probably since the Jordan era, that the East was even close to the West. And I know the Cavs won a title, but other than that, it's like always the West. It's crazy. So I just don't even know what teams in the East are even close to the West. Maybe the Celtics. The Bucks are obviously really good, but I'm just a firm believer that experience matters in the NBA playoffs. And that's the weird thing, is it's like maybe this year it doesn't. Maybe this is the one year where it's unique, where experience doesn't matter. But I mean, you go back in NBA history, experience matters. You have to. There are legitimate steps you have to go through that that Giannis hasn't gone through yet. So like that's it doesn't matter who you are. Like every player has gone through that. LeBron, Michael, the greats, every one of them, except for like Magic, who won a championship his rookie year. But for the most part, there are steps. But he had Kareem, so there are steps you have to go through to win titles. And so Lakers and Clippers, to me, like that's going to be a really fun Western Conference Finals. And then I certainly think Boston and Milwaukee, in the East, would be fun too. But I think that's less obvious in terms of going to happen than Lakers, Clippers. And I do think the Lakers will win it.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, since you're there, what do you kind of think of the Mavericks playing in Dallas? I mean, they're not ready to win a title yet, but they obviously have 2 really good pieces on their team.
Well, one for sure. No, Kristaps is good too. Luke is amazing. They need to figure it out quickly in terms of, getting the right pieces around him, because otherwise there's a lot of wasted time with guys that he's developing chemistry with that aren't going to be there. And then you're talking about a guy that when he's a free agent might be looking to leave. But yeah, I mean, Luke is he's unbelievable. He had a triple-double, 30-point triple-double the other night. It's funny. I was talking last night on my podcast, Steak, Bourbon, and Sports, about that 2018 draft, if you could redraft it. And my buddy who's on that podcast, and he went to Arizona, and so we argued before that draft. I was like, I would take Luka number 1, no, without question. And he was like, no, Ayton. I'd definitely take Ayton. Like, even 2 years later now, it's so obvious that Luka should have been the number 1 pick. But even then, definitely not Ayton. You could say, Trae Young, but one of those two, if you redrafted, would be the first 2 picks, and then Jaren Jackson's probably the 3rd pick. So it'd be interesting to see if you redrafted that 2018 draft, what it would look like. But yeah, Luka makes the Mavs fun to watch. I think this offseason is going to be very important in terms of putting the right pieces around Luka. I think they found some guys that are certainly the right pieces, but ultimately I think they're going to need more consistent 3-point shooting and probably another great player. Another player on Kristaps' level. I don't know that Kristaps could be the 2nd best player on a championship team. I think he's probably going to be your 3rd best player.
Yeah. Yeah, so I just want to go back to stay on the NBA really quick. I'm sure you saw the Devin Booker shot that he hit yesterday to beat the Clippers. You mentioned, you don't know if experience matters. I feel like that does make a difference because if he's in the Staples Center, the ball got knocked away before he took that shot. Does he still make that if there's 20,000 fans all screaming, exciting, that the ball just got deflected away and the Clippers are going to probably win? So I feel like kind of the environment that they're in has kind of leveled things out a little bit. TJ Warren's going for 53, 39, 32 points. I just feel like stuff is happening that wouldn't necessarily happen in away arenas on a level playing ground the way they are now. So I think there is something to be said about what you mentioned.
True. However, it's still the quote-unquote regular season. And, the regular season and the postseason in the NBA are so different. And I know every sport says that, but I don't know that there's a sport in which the chasm between regular season and postseason is that big. I don't know if there's a sport where it's that big like the NBA. And the reason for that is, so most NBA teams don't really do much advanced scouting for upcoming opponents. They're kind of on their own thing. They're doing their own thing. They're sort of looking at what they do, but they're not, because there's games so frequently, they're not looking at specific opponents and then playing those opponents. In the postseason, they do, obviously. You're zeroed in on an opponent. So every team has a flaw. In the NBA, the teams that are best at hiding their flaws win. And that comes with experience. I also think, the advanced scouting piece is so big. So you still get that in the regular season where teams aren't really preparing for specific teams, whereas in the postseason they are, and your flaws are right there for everybody to see. And so the best coaches, that's what they do. They just expose your flaws in the postseason and continually do it until you can counteract. And then it's about figuring out where those flaws are and dictating terms and that kind of stuff. So that's a reason why the regular season and postseason are so different. And then there's also young guys, and maybe this falls into what you were saying and to your point. There's this idea of pacing yourself, and that's, now there's more rest for players where they'll take games off and actually literally rest. But it's a freaking marathon. You play 82 games and then you got to play, you got to win 4 in the first round, win 4 in the second round, win 4 in the third round, win 4 in the championship. That's 16 wins you need.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right? 16 wins. And that's at a minimum. If you swept the entire postseason, you have to play 16 games to win a title.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, you're going to play 20 to 30 games in the postseason. So that's 100 basketball games. And not only that, but like injuries just mount up and fatigue and wear and tear because you've been playing nonstop for such a long period of time. So there is just this element of watching a team win a championship that like they are just on their last legs and they know they could spell the finish line. And that's something that comes with experience because you've been in that moment when you've been ousted from the playoffs and you felt that fatigue, and the fatigue is what did you in. And that happens a lot because the talent level in the NBA is so close that it's those little things, adjustments, scheme, defensive assignments, fatigue, that play such a crucial role. And the experienced team knows that. And so they feast on the younger team who might have had a guy like TJ Warren expel all of his energy, getting all of those points in a quote-unquote meaningless game. Now it's meaningful for the Suns because they haven't made the playoffs in a long time and they're looking to get back. And that's why, maybe to your point, that part of it matters less because these guys had time off and it hasn't been this continual grind. So we'll see. But I do think the advanced scouting, exposing teams' weaknesses, continuing to expose them, that is still going to be in play here in the bubble.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just moving to the next league, MLB's been kind of a disaster trying to do their whole thing. So do you think they're going to finish one? And if they do, who do you think will win in that league? I think best shot right now, just based on talent alone, I would think the Dodgers, especially with Mookie Betts there now and the pieces they had in place before. But I think it's going to be ugly, but they're going to try to get to the finish line if they can.
Yeah, they will. Again, if they can. The thing is, I don't think they're going to play 60 games. There's just going to be more teams that get it that then have to take games off, and those teams have to play teams that are going to take games off. So I think you're going to have at the end of the day, very few teams that actually got to 60, but they'll get there. The Dodgers are a good bet, only they always lose.
Yeah.
They have really good teams. They just can't figure out a way to win the World Series. It's so early to tell. I mean, the Yankees, the Cubs. I grew up in Chicago as a White Sox fan. They're fun and young. They've got some really good players. Yeah, some like Yoan Moncada, who they got from the Red Sox. The Chris Sale trade is fantastic. They've got this guy Luis Robert, who's a 22-year-old rookie from Cuba, who's like unbelievable. I think he's leading Major League Baseball in WAR, offensive and defensive. But that I think will be way much more up in the air relative to the NBA. Whereas like the NBA, it's like the Clippers are going to be there, the Lakers are going to be there. Where it's obvious the most talented teams will still be there. I just don't know if that's the case in baseball because it's like who gets it, when do they get it, and then and how much does it affect their clubhouse? I think teams that insulate themselves and buy in, which could be a surprise team, right? You get a surprise team that's good, that the clubhouse figures out, like, we like winning, we enjoy this, nobody go out, everybody stay in, quarantine yourself. I think that's a team that's going to end up winning it, and it could be a surprise. But the Dodgers are a good bet. Problem is they just always lose.
Yeah. And then last league, the NFL. I think you could pick a winner, but I'm kind of more interested to see how far you think Dallas is going to go this year, because I just feel like you never know what's coming from that team, but they have as much talent as anybody in the league, especially on the offensive side of the ball.
The Cowboys should be in the mix, no question about it. They're going to have one of the best offenses in football. I'm going to post a video here shortly on YouTube on the defense and the ways that they should still improve their defense, because you don't have to be great on offense and defense. You do have to be good. You have to be great on one side of the ball. You have to be okay on the other side of the ball. And I think I'm wondering if the Cowboys are they bad on defense or are they okay on defense? So I think like the difference between the Cowboys getting to the playoffs and flaming out, which is what they've done basically for the last 2 decades, is will their defense be okay or will it be bad? The Kansas City Chiefs they should win another Super Bowl. I mean, they have the best quarterback. in the league. It's probably not even close. And if you look at the Chiefs in 2018 versus 2019, like this is exactly what I'm talking about. An elite offense with a bad defense. In 2019, they were an elite offense with an okay defense.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's why the Chiefs lost in 18. It's why they won in 19. And so for the Cowboys, it's like, who are they? Are they the 2018 Kansas City Chiefs or the 2019 Kansas City Chiefs? I'd lean more towards 18 because I'm just not certain about their defense, specifically in the back end of their defense. But the NFL always has surprise teams. I think San Francisco is still going to be really good. I think they scheme well. They've got a great defense. Seattle will be good. But yeah, I mean, some of the kind of usual suspects that you can count on, the Patriots and Steelers, just not sure how good they're going to be this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Dallas I think they have the ability to be okay on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, they have Smith and Van Der Esch are good pieces to kind of build with your linebackers. I think secondary is probably kind of the question mark right now, but
right. And then and who rushes the passer opposite DeMarcus Lawrence? They got a bunch of lottery tickets, but at this point, you've got no proven commodity there, and that's that's where it's like, why not make a run at Everson Griffin? Why not make a run at Jadeveon Clowney? They're available.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's on a one-year deal, you're going to overpay for. It's like that one of those two could be the guys that push you over the edge, because at this point you're counting on Aldon Smith, who hasn't played in 5 years, and Bradley Anai, who's a 5th-round pick. Like, these are the guys you're counting on right now to rush the passer opposite DeMarcus Lawrence. That's what I find to be problematic, because the back end of your defense is bad, questionable at best, bad at worst, and and your linebacking core is okay for sure. I mean, that's certainly the best part of their defense. But I'm just, they had Robert Quinn, who picked up 11.5 sacks last year, rushing opposite DeMarcus Lawrence. Like, you need somebody else there that you can count on consistently that knows how to get to the passer, opposite DeMarcus Lawrence, to take advantage of that.
Yeah, for sure. And I agree with what you said on the Chiefs. I love Lamar. He was my fantasy quarterback, but I don't think he has what it takes to kind of lead Baltimore past Kansas City. I think it would take a lot for any team to figure out how to slow down Mahomes and do enough to beat that team.
Right, because the way the NFL works now, you have to outduel these offenses. So it's like, is your offense capable of putting up 50? Because if it's not, then you're like, not to say the Chiefs are going to score 50 every game, but that's the thing is, it's like, you get to a playoff, you're gonna have to win a game on defense. You're gonna have to win a game on offense. So can you win a game on, because people always look at the Super Bowl and they're like, well, it was low scoring. It's like, that's not how. But how'd you get there? Because you have to win multiple games to get there. So it's like, each game you're gonna win in different ways. So you have to figure out different ways to win. That's why if you have a bad defense, it might not be exposed in one playoff game, but it will be exposed in a different playoff game. Yeah. So in one of those playoff games, you're gonna have to score 50. And do you have an offense capable of doing that? That's a question that teams have to ask, because that's what it kind of takes to beat modern NFL offenses.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the Patriots in 2018. They won the Super Bowl 14-3, but they had to score 40 on the Chargers, and then 30 in Kansas City to get there.
That's exactly right. And everybody looked at the Patriots and were like, they won on defense. Did they? How about the 2 previous games where they won almost exclusively with their offense? Mm-hmm. And that's it. It's like, you have to win multiple ways. The Patriots of 2018 are a great example, but I mean, you go back in history and you find Super Bowl champs that had to do that every game. The Super Bowl is just one game, one independent trial. It's not indicative of past success or what will happen, what could happen. It's just indicative of you. That's how they had to win that game. So you had to have a team positioned to win a game like that, and they did.
Yeah. All right. That was Ari Temkin. You guys can find him on Twitter at Ari Sports. That's ARI Sports, all lowercase, all one word. Big thanks to him for coming on, talking about his career and, sports in general during this unfortunately sportless time that we've been living through. So we appreciate that. Make sure you follow him, and you can also check him out on Dallas Cowboys Radio Network 105.3 The Fan, Sirius XM Radio, Big 12 channel, occasionally on ESPNU Radio, as he mentioned, and he also co-hosts the Showtime with Coop podcast on CLNS Media. That's with Michael Cooper, who was a member of the Showtime Lakers, won a couple of championships with them, and talks a lot about his own playing career and kind of the throwback NBA. So that's a fun podcast. So check things out, show Ari some support. And on behalf of Ian, who had to run off in the middle of our podcast to go to work, appreciate him sticking it out and staying with us as long as he could. So we thank him for joining. We're hoping to be back next week, but we'll give you updates there. Sound you hear at the beginning and end of the podcast, that is from freemusicarchive.org. That's Young Kartz Seattle song playing. So just want to give the credit there. And again, thanks to Ari for joining. Thank you guys for listening, and we hope to be back soon. I'm Danny Priest, and thank you for tuning in to the Snowdeal and the Priest podcast.